Good morning, Year 12. How are we? Sorry, this is our Friday part 2 video. I hope that you are doing well, that you are taking time for yourself to stay grounded and calm and at peace. These are difficult times, but I want you to know that I hope my voice can send you some sense of balance or peace or familiarity, and that essentially these lessons together are deeply valuable, and I hope you appreciate them too, which I know many of you do. I asked you to have a little go at reading a divine image for me, and that we would speak about it fairly briefly today in our analysis of the poem. Today's lesson, after we've dealt with a divine image very briefly, is to actually introduce you to a little interim mini assessment. Now, that is not for you to panic about. This will not be a full essay, and you will have some help in this video before you start penning it. But more of that in just a moment. So let's start with a divine image. So if you hadn't already found it, which you should have by now, in having prepared for this video, it's on page 76 of your anthology. And of course, this is within the innocence section. So if you want to make a little note at the top of your poem here, the companion poem in Songs of Experience is the human abstract. Okay, so just make a little note at the top of your anthology there. The paired or companion poem is the human abstract. Now, this poem is a little bit more complicated, but there's definitely something that we can tie in with that we've spoken about before, and that is Blake's view of the creator, of God, okay, of this holy image. So Blake, of course, believed, and it's worth writing this down at the bottom of your poem, that all sort of deities, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, you know what I'm like, guys, reside in the human breast. In other words, all godliness, all holiness, all spirituality actually resides within the human breast. We've spoken about this before. Blake believed in a God amongst man. No external God, no external outside figure, chanting incantations of thou shalt not from the clouds. Okay? So what I would write in summary at the bottom there is that Blake believed that God primarily dwells in humanity or amongst humanity, okay, rather than this force beyond or above it or superior to it. So if such qualities reside in God, okay, the qualities that I mentioned in the poem, mercy, pity, peace, and love, so if such qualities reside in God, then of course they do so in humanity and in all humans too. We are all worthy of reverence. We are all worthy. We all have these basic qualities that provide the basis for universal brotherhood. Okay, so in this poem, Blake is really championing those qualities of a benevolent God amongst men: mercy, pity, peace, and love. They all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight, he calls them virtues of delight, return their thankfulness. Okay, so these are the qualities that people think of when they speak of God. Okay, these are the very general or genuine qualities. There's no wrath, there's no sort of malevolent power, there's no high in mightiness. So once again, and I know I say this in every single video, but we've got to find those threads, guys. We have an exclusion of the negative qualities or the negative elements that are not seen here in this picture of God. But we know they're in the natural world. Unfortunately, wrath and abuse of power, superiority, exclusivism, all those qualities of the status quo, they were very much present in Blake's time, and they are still very much present today. Okay, so this picture once again is limited. Okay, it's a limited image of God and the natural world. God here is a father of lambs and not tigers. Okay, but we know this is not balanced. The contraries have not been embraced. Okay, so the poetic voice is an innocent speaker, and it can only imagine the benevolent qualities of God. Okay, the second stanza begins, for mercy, pity, peace and love in God our Father dear, and mercy, pity, peace and love in man his child in care. Okay, so once again the stylistic choices here, lots of repetitions piled up on one another of the simple sort of coordinate conjunctions and a very childlike simplistic tone. Okay, for mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. So that stanza there is just a reiteration of that idea that holiness resides within the human breast that I mentioned before. Okay, then every man of every clime, once again, every man of every clime. We've had this idea again in his poetry, okay, this idealistic, kind of whimsical, joyous idea that every man receives mercy, pity, peace and love in their distress, from every clime, from every region, from every culture. This is a false utopia. This is an idealised, blinkered, limited view, okay. And then that last stanza, and all must love the human form. Okay, so we've got that imperative there, we've got that idea of basic equality for brotherhood amongst men. Okay, so this is a direct continuation. This is why I chose this as our next poem after a cradle song, guys. A nice connection here, you could pop this in your anthology, that God is this sort of figure that's at one with human beings through this recognisable human form and situation. But it is idealised, it is utopian. Okay, we know at Blake's time Muslims and Jews, African Americans, or just black individuals I should say really, were not equal. Were not equal by any measure, okay, to their white superior so-called counterpart, right? So really important that you see the sort of allusions within this piece, these purposeful allusions I should say. So this is in a ballad form. The stanzas are all quatrains, which all have kind of 4 and 3 beats alternately. A, B, C, B. Yeah, A, B, C, B. So that stanza form speaks of openness and simplicity. It sounds like a hymn, you know, said in church again, or you know, in a non-religious lens, it sounds like a nursery rhyme. Okay, going back to some of the other poems in the styles we've had before. Okay, that kind of lilting rhythm. So, with all of that in mind, I ask you this question. Let's sum it up. What qualities then do people think of when they consider God? Well, in this poem, supposedly mercy, pity, peace and love. These are mild qualities. There is no consideration of wrath, abuse of power or mightiness, superiority in exclusivism. Okay, so the contraries of human nature are not evident. What coordinate conjunction connective is used most frequently in the poem and why? Well, I mentioned that before. You should know it, but here it is. And. Okay, that's the coordinate conjunction, the connective, if you're being less fancy, that I was referencing. It's utilized 7 times. Okay, again, suggestive of that childlike simplicity of the poetic voice. Okay, what are the poetic voice's innocent views of equality at the close of the poem? What are those, guys? Have a think? Well, we know. They're here. Okay, all must love the human form. The poetic voice speaks of this basic equality or brotherhood of men, and there's no recognition of the inherent prejudice. In Blake's time. Sorry, it's taking a sip of cranberry juice. Important to stay hydrated, guys, and take care of yourself. Okay, so let's have a go. This is a past paper question. Now notice the date, January 2006. This is not via the new spec, but I grabbed this question because this question could very much be part of any Section B, Paper 2, protest paper question on Blake alone. Okay, it rings absolutely true for a protest paper. So this question is, I want you to write it down, please, probably in the centre of your page, as we like to do at A-level, so that we can explode this question, pull it apart and start planning our ideas. So give you a moment to write that down. Conflict lies at the heart of Blake's poetry. To what extent do you agree with this view? Now, there are clearly, just bring my tiny little cursor in here, some keywords in this question. I want you to have a go at highlighting for me the keywords that would need defining. Okay, if one is to take conflict to mean, okay, where is our debating term? Is it here? Lies at the heart of? Okay, and then of course we've got debate suggested in the common denominator. To what extent do you agree? I want you to take a moment and to think about the poems that we've studied so far. And this is completely up to you. But which poems do you think more readily capture some sort of conflict, some form of conflict? Now, when we say conflict, and you can remember this from GCSE, we're not just talking about physical conflict in the literal sense in terms of battlefields, okay, and armies and adversaries. We're talking about maybe something more psychological, maybe something more emotional. So here's my example for you, okay, to get you started. And then I want you to take 5 minutes around your poem, grabbing some more poems that you think would work, okay, around your question, sorry. So I've chosen as my first paired poems actually for this idea of conflict is The Blossom and The Sick Rose. Now, the two poetic voices are in conflict with one another. Now, what are they conflicted by? Well, they have conflicting views on sexuality, okay, in Blake's contemporary world. Now, we know in Blake's world there was a lot of conflict around the church's perceptions of sexuality and the romantics, with a capital R, perception of sexuality. If you remember back to my lesson on The Blossom and The Sick Rose, he had a very progressive liberal view of sexuality. You know, the inherent idea that he felt that children at birth, when given that gender, that, you know, their wings of sexuality and identity and creative imagination were clipped. So his poem The Blossom presents this kind of state or perception of sexuality that is fraught with denial and shame and guilt, because it uses so many metaphors to disguise the heart of the poem, which is sexual ecstasy, and the poetic voice is completely in denial about that nature. And then of course in The Sick Rose we have the complete opposite end of the spectrum. The poetic voice can only see sexuality as this corrupted, again, overtly shameful experience. So society at the time was conflicted because we had the institutions enforcing their views, those twin mills of oppression, the church and the state, and all it did was teach inhibitions through laws and religion. Thou shalt not, the shame that resides within the human breast. So what am I saying about conflict here, just to make this really clear? In a structural way, we have conflict in Blake's collection. In the two opposite ends, there is a conflict between the innocent portrayal of sexuality and a conflict between the experienced version of sexuality. So structurally there is conflict in that. We then have conflict in the voices of the poetic voices. Maybe less conflict in The Blossom because they're not aware of what they are sort of missing. But in The Sick Rose, the poetic voice is certainly conflicted by their desires and by what the church tells them sex is. Okay, which creates this horrible sense of shame and sort of this attempt to hide away. So definitely conflict in terms of perceptions of sexuality in Blake's time. So pause the video now, have a little think, just to give you a hint. Definitely look at the conflict found between parental or quasi-parental roles and children. Definitely have a little think about the conflict that's found in the natural world, nature versus man. Even though we haven't officially studied London, I did ask you to read this before, so you could use paired poems, The Echoing Green and London, and look at the conflict between industry and nature. That would be quite nice. Either way though, one last hint, sorry, look at the conflict in humanity's perceptions of God, okay, in the creator. So you can look at, the tiger and the lamb, Okay, that would be a really good one as well, and other poems that link in there too. So, sorry, 5-10 minutes, pause this video now, litter the outside of your question with your plan, like I did there, the poems you want to talk about, a brief kind of exposition of what the conflict is in the poem, and then we'll find ourselves back here. 5 minutes, off you go. Okay, so hopefully you'd pause that and you're back with me now. You need to have that done before you move on. So if you hadn't, here's a warning. Make sure you do so now. In doing that, what you've done is you've started to define what conflict is. Because this question is very vague. Conflict lies at the heart. What type of conflict? What are we dealing with here? The examiners want you to make it specific. You to define the conflict and the types of conflict, and it's saying that it lies at the heart. So there's the debate. Does conflict dominate, or are there other moments? Are there moments of respite? That's a good word here, like a break from the conflict. And of course there are small snatches. There are moments like in the Echoing Green where there is this nice symbiosis between the generations and man and nature. It's not all doom and gloom. Okay, he wants a balance here. So remember, you're never trying to completely go against the question. You're going to mainly agree, but there needs to be snatches of resistance to this. Lies at the heart. That means it's kind of, it absolutely dominates. Okay, you might agree that it does, but there are, of course, moments of respite. Okay, just a reminder there. In other words, what is the poetic voice conflicted by, and by whom? Okay, that's a good little question to have if you're stuck. Okay, what I've done for you, I would expect you to write for me 2 paragraphs. Okay, year 12. So I'm putting this out here now, and it will be placed on Edgelink as well. By Monday, it will be due Monday. I quite like it in for Monday morning, so I can start marking them Monday as for my working day. I want you to write 2 paragraphs answering that question, and I'd like them typed, I'd like them emailed to me, and then you will receive feedback. Okay, now I have created for you a potential opening just to get you going in writing about Blake. Okay, so look at my potential openings here. Okay, there's a series of them. Which ones are most impressive and why? I'll let you pause here to read them, and I want you just to choose and write down your choice, and I'll explain my thoughts. Go now. Okay, so look at these. At the heart of Blake's collection lies a reflection of the conflicts experienced within society when the contraries of human nature fail to coexist. What I like about this first one is they've taken the idea of conflict and they've explained where they think the conflict comes from in Blake's world. Well, it comes from this big idea, this massive, big idea, and in introductions we deal with big ideas, that conflict arises when you fail to allow the contraries to coexist. Yeah, that's where conflict comes from. So I like that. You could obviously carry on your introduction there by defining some specific types of conflict. So the conflict within society's views of the creator, the conflict found within perceptions of sexuality, the conflict between the generations or man and nature. So that's a nice start. Now, obviously, I mean, you knew I was going to laugh at this one. The second one is not a good example, and I'm hoping that you didn't write it down. Conflict is shown in songs of innocence and experience in many different ways. It's vague, it's non-committal, it tells me nothing, it's obvious, it's fruitless. We don't want it. Forget about it. Okay, let's look at the next one. Undeniably, conflict is articulated in both sections of the collection. True. And is portrayed through a denial of freedom enforced by society's oppressive institutions. Again, that's quite nice. We have something specific, something sharp. We would go on and we talk about what sorts of things are denied, causing conflict. But that one would have been good as well if you chose that one as a starting point. Let's look at the last. Integral to an understanding of Blake's poetry is an exploration of where conflict is generated in society and by whom. Now this is okay, but again it's just a little non-committal. It says here, really all you've done is reworded the question. Like, yes, it's important, and he looks at where conflict is and who creates it. but it doesn't say who. At least in the first and the second, we have something sharp, something contextually sharp. So in summary, either 1 or 3 would have been great, and hopefully you grabbed one of those. If not, pause now. Okay, so remembering, just as we do for any of our essays, we did this at GCSE, but obviously the content of our paragraphs are a lot more detailed and mature. But this is, of course, your structure of your paragraph. Okay, so if you're not sure, you might want to take a screenshot here. And of course the AO2 is really important here, and that's in your explanation, zooming in on language, form, structure, layers of analysis to prove the idea that you have pioneered in the first point. Okay, so have a look at this opening. Now, in terms of grade, I mean, do you think this is a top band response? Remembering top band is detailed, has judicious use of quotation, has a really strong voice. Like at A-level, the difference here is they don't want you to sound mechanical, like you're just regurgitating the teacher's ideas. They want you to have this passion, this flair. Does it have that? That's top band. Okay, does it have layers of analysis, interweaving of context? And context isn't bolted on the end, right? It shouldn't be. It should be little tiny moments peppered in. Blake's ideas, his influences, contemporary readers' responses, okay, or modern readers' responsive, interwoven. So here it is. I'm not going to read this out because it's on the screen. I've colour-coded it for speed. You can see that there. Give it a little read. Do you think that it has hit the mark, or is there anything there that could be developed? Now, you might want to write this model paragraph in your exercise books and then maybe use a highlighter, box around model paragraph if you think it's perfect. If not, why don't you take 10 minutes to read, pop in your book, and maybe edit if you think there was something that could be added or improved in this section. I'll give you 10 minutes now. Okay, just remembering, guys, these are our assessment objectives. If you don't have them written in your exercise book, you might want to remind yourself that it is kind of full of teacher jargon. You can see the percentages there of what they're worth. AO1, I always just summarise as, it's your ideas, it's your thoughts, it's you answering the questions sharply, it's writing well. Okay, AO2 is your reference to author's methods. Okay, it's your use of things like juxtaposition, imagery, lexical field, the use of quatrains or meter or form. Okay, that they want it all the time. AO3 is your context, okay, both of production and reception, then and now, author's intentions. AO4 is you pairing those poems up and making connections between them in this exam for Blake. Okay, it might also be you looking through a different lens, like a Marxist reader or a feminist reader. And then AO5 is your debate. Okay, so pause now if you'd like to pop that in. Okay, remembering, guys, that we should have a basic understanding of our terminology. I had to do this slide last year because people were still a little bit unsure of what they were. So this might help some of you as well. If you haven't, you might want to start a keyword log and just get these in. You can see some examples I've put from Blake's actual poems, which is quite nice. So again, if you want that, pause now. Okay, there's our top band. I'm not going to go on to that, but that's to pause if you want to look whether you've met it in your work before you send it to me. And that's it. There's a lot more I could say in this video, but essentially, look, next lesson we're going to read the Chimney Sweeps, okay, the Chimney Sweeper poems, and they're some of my favourites. So if you want to get ahead, give those a little read, and I'll be sending you some stuff for context, okay, so we can't do that just yet. But for now, back we go. Okay, you are answering this question. Okay, so ideally send to me before Monday so I can mark, so I can give you some more feedback, and then Monday we will take a look at the Chimney Sweep poems. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, Year 12. Just a little bit of routine. That was part 2 for Friday's lesson, so it's a little bit of a longer one when you put the 2 videos together, but I would love just to get through as much content as possible with you guys, okay, and to keep this routine up. I appreciate you all being here with me today. I hope you are well. Sending love and light. See you soon.